But if, let's say, the Social Security issue, if somebody, so in other words, they were using this, both using the same name, yeah, that would probably go through. So the system's not perfect. But when I get to the EADs, there is a way that they've gotten a little better. Okay. So like I said, they're trying to make this more mandatory. They're trying to make this program spread. And you also have to understand that E-Verify, there's a unit at CIS dedicated to E-Verify. And it started with like 3 or 4 employees, say 4 or 5 years ago, and now has well over 100. And they go, the people that work for E-Verify go out in the field and they give talks like I'm doing, promoting E-Verify all the time. So there's an incredible amount of government resources going into this program. So they want to spread it. They want it to become really like eventually mandatory for everybody. And so they're making little encroachments or little ways that they can make it more mandatory every time they have a chance. So the newest of these is for federal contractors. And what happened is that President Bush signed an executive order that said that starting on January 15th, if you have a federal contract, you're an employer, you have to E-Verify everyone on the contract and all new hires. And then they put into effect some exceptions for, and one of them is for institutions of higher education. And that sounds great, except that you still have to E-Verify everybody on the contract. So in reality, it wasn't all that helpful. It wasn't really much of an exception because, well, I can tell you quite a bit about the CUNY system. They have all of these grants and contracts coming in every year. It's very hard to tell what's a grant and what's a contract, and the law only covers the contracts. And then it's very hard to tell, to like pull out employees that work on the contract and be able to only E-Verify them. So it becomes so overwhelming that they just have to do the only thing that they can do at that point is just E-Verify everybody, which is what academic institutions are starting to do. To comply, they can't, this is useless to them. They can't separate out who's on a contract and who's not. And so they E-Verify everybody. And that's really exactly what they want. They're trying to. And then last year, you know, by way of encroachments, they put into effect an extension of OPT for STEM students. And that's students with science, technology, engineering, and math degrees. And it was 17 months. But you couldn't get it, you couldn't get that extension unless you had an E-Verify employer. So it's another way to push employers into E-Verify. So I think it's, fortunately or unfortunately, depending on what you think of it, it's the wave of the future. Okay. All right, so what's going to happen is you're going to take that I-9, that completed I-9, you're going to have it right in front of you, and you're going to actually put it into the system. And I'll show you how that works. And you're just going to be loading it right into the system. And behind the scenes, it's checking millions of records and hopefully coming up with something. And where there have been lawsuits, it's because a lot of employers think that these databases, both by Social Security and DHS, are not very good. Now, I don't really know. You know, I don't have any independent way of knowing. I do know that I have a client that has gone to E-Verify, and they're not having the problems that, you know, employer groups have foreseen, but that's what the complaint was. Okay, so you go into the system, and I'm not going to go into how you register because it's really just like a technical job, and I don't think any of you are actually going to be registering for E-Verify. Okay, so this assumes you're already registered. You go in, and this is the first screen you're going to see. And you see it says initial verification on the top left. You click on that, and this is actually what you would get. And it's going to ask you, it comes right from the I-9, what is the employee attesting to be? Are they a U.S. citizen, a green card holder, or an alien with work authorization? So you'd press something, and unfortunately on this screenshot they have U.S. citizen, and I say unfortunately because this is the easiest possible case. You know, if they had given us screenshots with a more difficult case, it'd be a little bit more of an illustration. Where you have a U.S. citizen, it's very easy. So you'd press next. You didn't put U.S. citizen, press next. And this would come up, and it's just asking you, what did they show you? And in this case, it's an unexpired or an expired passport. And you'd get a different next screen if you had said list B or C, but unfortunately, that's not what they show us. Okay, and then you get this screen, and this screen is kind of the heart of the E-Verify system. And they're asking you all of these questions that come right off of the I-9, including Social Security number. which is mandatory. And everything has to be filled, well, everything with a little red star has to be filled out or the system won't work. And if you put more, the system works better. At least that's what they tell us. And then if you have, like they have little circles with question marks, those are for example, they have one at last name. So if you have a Spanish last surname that has many parts, it'll tell you what the best way to put that Spanish name is. So it's helpful guides where you might have problems. And what's very important here, which sounds so trivial, is that whoever's putting in this, inputting this information, that they don't have any typos. Because I'm going to show you what happens if something is wrong. And it's very easy when you're putting in a Social Security number to be off by just a digit, and you're going to set in motion a whole procedure that was probably totally unnecessary. Okay. All right, so you're going to hit, submit or next, and there are a couple possibilities of what's going to happen. Okay, the first one is that you're going to get employment authorized. And I'm an E-Verify employer, and I did this to myself because I wanted to see how it worked. And I came back employment authorized because I'm a US citizen in like 3 seconds. So that's great, except that not everybody working is a US citizen. And that happens supposedly in 94% of the cases. It'll come back in 3 to 5 seconds. But it doesn't always do that. So, and there are several other possibilities. The first is a Social Security tentative non-confirmation. That's where they're saying, I don't know, we're not sure, this doesn't seem to be right. And then they may get a DHS verification in process, and that's when the person had some kind of immigration document, and they have to check on it and see if it's a good immigration document. And then what will happen is they'll do that, and then the employer will have to go back into the system and check, and they'll be told either, okay, they're good to go, they're employment authorized, or there's a DHS tentative non-confirmation. All right, so let me show you what it looks like. All right, this is employment authorized. This is easy, and you'll see it in the red circle, employment authorized. And they give you a case verification number on the top, and the employer writes it on the I-9. They print this out, they put it in the file, and it's done. It's easy. But of course, it doesn't always happen that way. All right, so I already told you what happens with employment authorized. It's very simple. But if you have a TNC, you have to tell the employee, okay. You tell the employee about it. You call the employer calls the employee in and says, you have this problem. Do you want to contest or not? That's going to be the first question. So I would say 95% of the time people are going to contest, because the problem with the whole system is that it's usually not the employee that's the issue. The employee is usually work authorized, and there's something wrong either with the way the employer input the information or with the databases. So most people are going to contest. So and I'll get to that. But if they do say, forget it, I'm not going to contest, it's probably because there's a reason. It's probably because they are using a fraudulent document. And at that point, the employer can consider that a final non-confirmation and terminate the employee. Okay.
The employer has no obligation to report the employee. Is that correct?
Well, I'm going to get to that. It depends. Like, for example, if you got a tentative non-confirmation and the person said, I'm not going to contest, no, at that point they don't. Okay. There is a circumstance where there is going to be an obligation, and I'll get to that. And that is an issue that came up because I'm training one particular employer that's going live with this, and that's something that came up last week.